Albert Fish was born in 1870 in Washington, D.C., into a fractured environment marked by poverty, instability, and generations of mental illness. His father died when Fish was still a small child, leaving his mother overwhelmed and financially incapable of caring for him. She placed him into an orphanage known for harsh discipline, emotional deprivation, and conditions that stripped children of stability. These early experiences shaped him profoundly. The rigid environment, combined with loneliness, humiliation, and untreated trauma, created a disordered foundation that would shadow his entire life. As he grew older, his personality fractured further. He developed a strange mixture of withdrawn behavior, religious confusion, and extreme self-punishment, convinced that suffering was a kind of spiritual purification. By the time he reached adulthood, his worldview was distorted, but he learned to hide it behind a polite, soft-spoken exterior. Fish wandered between states throughout his 20s and 30s, working sporadically as a house painter, handyman, and laborer. He lived cheaply in boarding houses, under various aliases, avoiding deep relationships and keeping his inner life hidden. Neighbors often describe him as a strange but harmless old man. Landladies thought of him as quiet, even gentle. Children occasionally chatted with him, unaware of the danger he posed. Over time, his mental instability blended with increasingly dangerous impulses. He believed he received messages from God, calling him toward acts that he interpreted as tests of faith or punishments. He avoided the attention of authorities, moving constantly, never staying long enough for anyone to notice patterns in his behavior. This ability to blend into struggling neighborhoods made him invisible for decades. The early 1920s marked the period when Fish's involvement in serious crimes began to emerge. Investigators later identified several early disappearances that occurred near places where Fish had been living or working, though evidence was too thin to establish concrete responsibility. What became clear, however, was that Fish targeted vulnerable children, especially those from families facing economic hardship, because they were less supervised, more trusting of strangers, and less likely to be immediately protected by the system. He used manipulation, soft speech, and grandfatherly behavior to earn their confidence. His method relied not on force but on deception and patience. This made him incredibly difficult for police to trace. Cases occurred in different states, with different victims, and none of the incidents initially seemed connected. The earliest crime later linked to him was the disappearance and death of Francis McDonnell in July 1924. Francis, 8 years old, vanished while playing on Staten Island. Witnesses reported seeing an older man walking through the area, looking disoriented, muttering to himself. The child was found in a wooded spot not far from his home. The crime confused police. It appeared motiveless, vicious, and perpetrated without any clear personal connection. Despite multiple witnesses describing a grey-haired stranger, the police had no name to attach to him. The investigation stalled, and the case grew cold for nearly a decade until Fish's arrest revealed his presence in the area on the same day, along with details only the perpetrator could have known. While Fish's own statements were erratic and driven by delusion, investigators concluded he was responsible. Another major case was the 1927 disappearance of 4-year-old Billy Gaffney. Billy was playing in the hallway of his apartment building in Brooklyn when he suddenly vanished. The only witness was Billy's playmate, slightly older than him, who told police that the boogeyman had taken Billy, a description meaning little to police until many years later. The older boy described a man with grey hair, a scruffy mustache, and shabby clothes. For months, police searched canals, rooftops, and storage rooms across the borough. Rumors spread throughout the neighborhood, and newspapers published Billy's photograph for weeks. Yet there were no solid leads. Even when Fish was later questioned about the case, his answers contradicted themselves, but several investigators recognized elements of truth in the timeline and his movements. They concluded that Billy's disappearance, too, was almost certainly his work. But the case that brought Fish to national attention was the disappearance of 10-year-old Grace Budd in 1928. Grace came from a working-class family living in rural northern Manhattan. Her older brother, Edward, had placed an advertisement seeking farm work, and Fish, under the alias Frank Howard, responded. He visited the Budd home twice, presenting himself as a kindly, aging farmer searching for a helper. He spoke softly, smiled politely, promised Edward a job, and gained the trust of the entire family. On his second visit, he persuaded them that he wanted to take Grace to a birthday party for his supposed niece. Her parents, believing the old man to be trustworthy, allowed her to go. It was the last they saw of her. The disappearance horrified the city. Newspapers printed Grace's picture daily. Police interrogated dozens of suspects, including Grace's father and brother. They even suspected a young man who lived nearby, whose life was ruined by false accusation. Yet the trail remained cold. Fish drifted through boarding houses after the crime, working odd jobs while avoiding any direct connection to the Budd family. For 6 years, the case lingered unsolved. The Budds waited endlessly for answers. Edward Budd, haunted by guilt for having placed the advertisement that attracted Fish, spent years assisting detectives. Grace's mother suffered a nervous breakdown. Entire neighborhoods lived in fear, convinced the stranger might still be nearby. It was not until 1934 that a breakthrough occurred. Grace's mother received a letter written in an ornate, old-fashioned style. Much of the content was disturbing and wildly inaccurate, filled with delusions, but the letter gave enough information for detectives to recognize it as coming from the man who had taken Grace. The key clue came not from the text but from the envelope. The unique emblem embossed on the stationery linked the writer to a charity boarding house. Detectives rushed there and soon found that the man who had recently occupied the room under a false name was Albert Fish. Police set up surveillance, waiting for the mysterious visitor to return. When Fish arrived, detectives confronted him. He did not flee or resist. Instead, he calmly put down his belongings and accepted arrest as though he had been expecting it. Once in custody, Fish immediately became the subject of intense psychiatric interest. He admitted to a wide range of actions but often drifted into incoherent stories involving visions, religious punishments, and hallucinations. Detectives sifted through his statements, separating delusion from fact. By comparing timelines, witness accounts, and letters, they connected Fish to the McDonnell, Gaffney, and Budd cases. While some details remained uncertain, the overarching pattern was unmistakable. Fish had moved unnoticed through the city for decades, preying on children whose families were powerless to protect them. His trial in 1935 drew national attention. Journalists from across the country filled the courtroom daily. The prosecution focused on the Grace Budd case, as it had the strongest evidence. The deceptive alias, the visits to the Budd home, the letter, and Fish's own fragmented admissions. The defense argued that Fish was legally insane and therefore not responsible for his actions. Psychiatrists testified extensively, describing him as deeply mentally ill, suffering from severe delusions and lifelong psychological damage. Others argued that despite his disorders, he understood the nature and consequences of his acts. The jury struggled with the question: was he insane, or was he a man fully aware of the harm he caused? Ultimately, after only a short deliberation, they found him guilty and recommended the death penalty. Several jurors later stated privately that they believed he was insane but feared he would otherwise be released someday. Fish was sent to Sing Sing prison to await execution. Prison guards describe him as oddly polite, introverted, and calm, even cheerful at times. He expressed no fear of death, telling guards that he saw it as a spiritual cleansing. He wrote letters that rambled between lucid reflection and delusional theology. Psychiatrists visited him in his final months, trying to understand the psychological forces that shape him. Some describe him as one of the most severe examples of untreated mental illness they had ever encountered. Others concluded he was fully aware of his crimes but lacked empathy entirely. Appeals were filed, but all were denied. On January 16, 1936, Albert Fish was executed in the electric chair. Witnesses reported that he remained calm, even serene, as he walked to his death. With his execution, one of the darkest criminal chapters in American history closed. In the decades that followed, researchers studied Fish's case relentlessly. His crime sparked discussions about mental health intervention, the importance of centralized police databases, and better systems for tracking suspects who move across state lines. Students of criminal psychology analyzed his delusions, his childhood trauma, and the extraordinary gap between his gentle appearance and the danger he represented. His case reshaped investigative techniques, forcing law enforcement to consider that some of the most dangerous offenders are those who appear the least threatening. While many details of his life remain shrouded in mystery, his story became a reminder of the importance of early mental health care, community vigilance, and improved investigative cooperation. The name Albert Fish, tied to tragedy and unanswered questions, endures as a symbol of how a single individual can evade detection for years while leaving heartbreak in his path.